All right. Well, we might as well get started early since there's 18 of you here already. That's fantastic. Who wants to start us off with our first question?
I just had a really quick question about factor levels.
Yep.
I answered it, but I still don't know why what I answered is correct, only because I was just kind of going with the flow and trying to answer it, but I'm not sure if I actually understand it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So the factors in the case of 216 are the type of drug, and then the factor levels are just D1, D2, and the placebo, because the factor levels are literally just saying like the different types of factors, right? And so the big factor that we're dealing with here is the different drugs that we're giving to the patients, and so the levels are just specifically those three types. They're either getting drug 1, drug 2, or they're getting the placebo.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. I think the word levels is what throws that off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Levels makes it sound like there should be some sort of ranking or hierarchy to it. And that's just not the case. It's a poorly named thing.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Of course.
I do have a question for one of them.
Yeah.
The question that I have will be the second part of 2.22.
Yeah.
Wasn't sure about the two factors or the three factors. That's the only one that I really felt like I was at a standstill.
The reason why it's a two-factor structure is because the only factors are the type of glaze and then the thickness. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's unfortunately some of these things can be a little subjective. It can be interpreted a couple different ways, so they can seem a little cloudy. But yeah, in the case of that one, it's just the thickness and the type of glaze.
So what would be for the last part when it says if the measuring is for the different from the experience, what would be an example if it was different?
I'm sorry, repeat that question again.
For the last part of that question, when it says if the measurements of the units are different from the experiment unit, then identify both. What would be an example if they was different?
Okay, so if the measurement units are different from the experimental units, identify both. Well, measurement units, remember, are so in fact in 216 you could argue that the measurement units and the experimental units are actually the same, right? So the book says that the experimental unit is wards, and that the measurement units are the patients, because those are the things that are being measured. But the people are also kind of the things that are being experimented on. So one could very easily argue that the experimental unit is also the patients. In the case of 222, where we're talking about these pottery pieces, your experimental units and your measurement units are the same, because you're basically experimenting on the different pottery pieces, right? And then you're measuring the different results from the pottery pieces. So I think that's what they're talking about. If they're different, identify both. Sometimes they can be different, but I would say a lot of times they are the same.
Okay.
Kofi, you've got a question?
Yes, my question has been answered. It was related to the difference between the measuring unit and the. Just I was rather thinking of it in the days that they were looking at, like the 8 days period. So, but it's been answered.
Okay. Anybody else? How about, go ahead, Danielle.
Thank you. I was going to ask a little bit about 2.23. I was trying to, I had drawn a picture and I was trying to figure out exactly what kind of a justification, because I'm just kind of stumped on this one.
Yeah, it's, I really think 2.23 is one of those where you could really make a pretty good argument for either design, in all honesty. The reason why design B is the better option is because the experimental units are not homogeneous. And that's because one group of consumers gives uniformly low scores and the other group gives uniformly high scores, no matter what recipe is used. So using design A, it would be possible to have a group of consumers that gives mostly low scores randomly assigned to a particular recipe. And then, of course, then that recipe would, kind of get screwed. So this would bias that recipe. Using design B, the experimental error would be reduced because each consumer would evaluate each recipe. So even those naysayers, who always give a low score would basically give low scores to everything. And then those, shiny, happy people that think everything is perfect, that give high scores to everything would also give high scores to everything. So, we would treat it as each consumer as a block, and each of the treatments would be the recipes is observed in each block, and this would give us kind of each recipe would be subjected to both the low and the high scores, and then those would just kind of even themselves out. They would no longer create a bias because they would be uniform across all the recipes.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah.
And since you said you can make the argument for both, are you looking for just that one answer, or were you looking for the argument of if someone did choose design A?
No, I would prefer that someone would choose design B and
Okay.
explain it the way I did, because design B is technically the better option. It's just you could make an argument for design A, being okay, but design B is definitely better.
Got you. And for the record, I did get that one wrong. So if anybody's wondering, don't feel bad. I got that one wrong. I'm in the process of changing.
Good on you for admitting that. You're not the first one, and you won't be the last one.
I was going to say, see, I drew pictures, but I didn't even write the answer because I was just at a loss last night. I just couldn't get there. So thank you.
Yeah, I really, honestly, guys, I think chapter 1, well, not chapter 1, I guess it's chapter 2, but week 1, I really think this is the hardest set of homework you're going to have in this entire class, because so many of these things feel subjective. It's not like math where 2 + 2 is 4 and you get an answer and you go, all right, that's the right answer. These are the kind of head scratchers where you're like, oh God, am I thinking about this the right way? Am I overthinking this? Is there a different way of thinking about it? So this is a tough one. Students struggle with these a lot. And there's a lot of overthinking that happens with these. So, but it's good, because it gets us thinking about these things. What about the first one? How are we doing on A? Who wants to take a guess at what the explanatory variable is for A?
This is Cecily Jackson. I said that the explanatory variable was the stroke treatment administered within the 12 hours after the stroke begins.
Okay. Can you be more specific? It is kind of the treatment, but we'd probably be more specific to say the explanatory variable is just the new blood clot medication.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Oh,
See what I'm saying? Yeah.
I see. I was like, it's the medication that they're using. Okay, but I see
Yeah.
what you're saying now.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because that can be construed that some other medication was being used.
Right.
Okay, I understand. But I did have some questions though about about that one. You said it was tricky, and I
It
had
is
questions
tricky.
about the confounding. So I guess I'll just go on and say what I said, and if I'm wrong, everybody can see.
Can laugh at you mercilessly.
Yes, of course. That's a good thing. We don't have our cameras on, so we're good to go. So for the confounding, and I had confounding variables, but I don't know if that's true. And I may again have overthought this. I said one, well, and these aren't variables, these are more questions, and that's where I struggled.
Yep.
For A and B, I had questions, not technical variables, but I had are the patients things that are confounding, are the patients presenting to the hospital within the 12-hour window? Is the actual time, the second was, is the actual time of the stroke, the actual time of the stroke could possibly be unknown as this is a self-reporting event. 3, it is unknown if the patients from the previous year received a comparable treatment within the 12-hour window. See, part of this too is, I guess, my healthcare thinking, because now I'm looking at all of these things from that mind.
Right. No, that's good. And yes, you did overthink it a little bit, but that's
Okay.
typical and that's good. But I think you got it with one of them.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not going to say which one. I'm not going to say which one.
Is number 3?
Yes, it is. It's
Okay.
the confounding variable is really the year in which the patients were admitted to the hospital, because as you kind of got at with your questions, the difference between what happened with the patients last year or the year before and what's happening with the patients this year is a huge difference, and so that really muddies the waters.
Okay. To continue on my let's see. The reason I'm saying it was invalid, a valid comparison cannot be made between the current patients and the previous year's patients because of their differing circumstances.
Yeah, and it really comes down to the fact that those who were admitted to the hospital the previous year weren't given this new blood clot medication. So if we see any improvement whatsoever in these patients this year, we really don't know what's going on because there are too many changes, right? You have to keep all things being equal and then change one thing to be able to say that that's the thing that makes a difference.
Okay. So my proposed change was actually to compare the patient status, compare the status of patients receiving the treatment within the 12-hour window to patients who received the treatment after the 12-hour mark, but maybe that's actually not the study.
Right, it's not. But again, it's because you've got your medical hat on, and the problem with a lot of these questions, and in fact, in real life, a problem with a lot of these is the true answer to how you fix something and the true answer to how you eliminate a confounding variable usually involves doing things that are horribly medically unethical. And so it's impossible. For instance, the only way we could eliminate the effects of this confounding variable would be to randomly assign stroke patients to the new blood clot medicine and others to a placebo. But what doctor in their right mind is going to give stroke patients a placebo? And
No
so that's
doctor,
what
I
I mean
hope.
by why this gets difficult, is because if any of you have any kind of medical background, you would never think of this as an answer because you would never do this to your patients.
Right.
Yeah. So we have to think of these questions in the abstract. We have to take them out of the real world and think of them in the abstract and basically get rid of all morals and ethics and think of it strictly from a scientific, logical kind of standpoint.
Okay.
Dr. McBride.
Yes.
So I just had a question. Would it be possible to suggest like a prospective study since the medication is new? Like, would that be a legitimate answer?
Well, I think it would be a legitimate real world answer. It wouldn't be the answer that the book or I was looking for.
Okay, sorry.
No, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying again that would be something that you would do in the real world. We want to think of these as more. Don't overthink it, right? We want to think of these as just a simple thought experiment. Simplify the process. It's all about identifying, kind of what's being measured, what's your explanatory variable, what's possibly screwing up that measure, and then how would you fix it? In an ideal situation, if you could play God, how would you fix it? I've got two hands, Raven and Kofi. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. You guys got either one of you got a question?
Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Raven.
Okay, so I'm Raven. I kind of sent you a private message, but I guess I'll ask and kind of embarrass myself a little bit. Um, I had for the confounding variable to be like the new screening procedure, only because my thought process was that was the, I had that to be the explanatory variable because that was the variable being manipulated by the researcher.
Yeah, and as the previous person said, and I forget who that was. I think it maybe was Cecily. I'm not sure.
It was, yes.
Oh, fantastic! My memory isn't bad. She said pretty much the same thing, and you're on the right track. The new screening procedure is more or less the explanatory variable, but we want to kind of drill down, right? The screening procedure is too vague, so let's drill down and really look at what are we really kind of studying? What are we really looking at to see has an effect? And it's the new blood clot medication, which is part of the new screening procedure. So you're not necessarily wrong, you're just not specific enough, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that does. Thank you.
Of course. Kofi, you're next.
Yes, a similar question on that because I was also looking at it from the point that it says the new screening procedure is said to be effective. I was thinking the confounding variable was the new blood clot medication because it could be providing or manipulating the effect, not necessarily the new procedure.
Yeah, I can see that, right? But think about it from, how is kind of think of it from a hypothesis testing standpoint, right? So a hospital introduces a new screening procedure to identify patients suffering from a stroke so that a new blood clot medication can be given to the patient during the critical period of 12 hours after the stroke. Okay. The procedure appears to be very successful because in the first year of its implementation, there is a higher rate of total recovery by the patients in comparison to the rate in the previous year for patients admitted to the hospital. So basically, what kind of hypothesis or what kind of claim would somebody say? They would say, hey, this new procedure seems to work. Okay, so I'm going to claim that the new procedure works. Well, what really is the new procedure? Well, the new procedure is just giving them this blood clot medication. So instead of saying the procedure works, we're going to be specific and say this new blood clot medication works because technically, according to this description, that's all this new procedure is. It's just giving them this medication. That's it, right? It doesn't list anything else. Now, there could be more to it, but given the information from this scenario, all that we're told is the only change they made from last year to this year is they started giving them this new medication. So that becomes the explanatory variable because that's the only change that's been done. And so we're seeing if that's the thing that is causing, right, that can explain, that's why it's the explanatory, can explain why there's a different outcome, i.e. the patients are recovering at a higher rate. Does that make sense?
Kind of.
Yeah, it's all about boiling it down to a hypothesis test. And I know we haven't talked about hypothesis test formally, but hypothesis test is basically a scientific way of making a claim and then testing that claim. So it's all about I see something happening. I think I can make an improvement to it. So I'm going to create an intervention. And what is that intervention going to be? Well, in the case of this, the intervention is I'm going to give patients this new blood clot medication. And that new intervention becomes the point of study. And my hypothesis is going to be that this new intervention, this new blood clot medication causes, right, higher rates of recovery. And then you test that hypothesis to see if it's true or not. So the explanatory variable is the thing in your hypothesis that you think is causing this difference, this observed difference. I think it makes a lot more sense when we look at the second one, right? I think we can all agree what the explanatory variable in the second one is. What is it?
The software to improve math scores.
Yes, very good, Danielle. Because that's the only difference, right? Some students used the software, some students didn't. The teacher concludes the software is effective because the students using the software had significantly higher scores on the SAT than the students who didn't. So in the teacher's eyes, the only difference between these two groups of students, those who scored higher on the SAT and those who didn't score higher on the SAT, is that this group used the software and this other group didn't use the software. So you can see how by observation, that would become an explanatory variable. That would become the thing that they think explains why one group is different from the other. Just like getting the blood clot medication versus not getting the blood clot medication is the only difference between the two groups. So therefore, we think that explains why one group had a higher rate of recovery than the other. But when you look at it deeper, you can see that there's all sorts of confounding variables, all sorts of other things that could have, made the things different. In the first example, the confounding variable is the fact that it was a year ago, right? It's the year in which they were admitted. The patients last year didn't get the blood clot medication, but there also could have been a whole crap load of differences between what happened last year to stroke victims and what happened this year. Anything as simple as just last year we had a really shitty doctor and this year we have a really good doctor, right? There's too many other things that could have changed between last year and this year, so that becomes our confounding variable. Well, similarly with these kids, some used it and some didn't use it, but what's the confounding variable here? Or I even hate you calling it a confounding variable. What's the confounding thing happening here?
Can I take a
Doc-
stab at it? Oh, sorry.
Yes, Seth, go for it.
No, if somebody else wants to, that's fine.
Oh, that's okay. I'm good.
I was just going to say that I thought it might be the level of motivation among students because the ones that are staying after school to use it are displaying a higher level of motivation.
You nailed it on the head, Seth. That's exactly
Yeah.
it. The fact that the teacher let the students choose whether or not to use the software means that, exactly as you said, the students that are more highly motivated are going to choose to use that software, and those are the types of students that are probably going to study more anyways and probably would have scored higher on the SAT to begin with. So we really can't say that the software was the true cause of their improvement. Alice, do you have something to add?
Well, I was actually going to say pretty much the same thing. I mean, usually, just because my kid is probably one of those kids. I mean, she actually studied for these things,
Right.
which having the software means that, of course, if you're going to bother to use it, that means you studied for the test. And if you study for a test as opposed to not studying for a test, you're probably going to do better than the
Exactly.
people who didn't study.
Exactly. So with that in mind, again, step back, step out of the real world, and think of this in a pure sense of, setting up an experiment. What could we do to basically alleviate this confoundment? How could we eliminate this confounding variable?
Well, I think you just kind of like the other study, you compare both of the kids that actually took the who actually used the program and compared just their scores together, as opposed to comparing them to people who use the program as opposed to not using the program.
Well, we still want to test whether or not the program is successful. So we still need a group that uses the program and a group that doesn't use the program.
Okay.
But how does anybody think? I see Cecily and Danielle both want to chime in. What do you think?
This is Danielle.
Go ahead, Danielle. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, maybe I went way off the deep end here, but I was kind of looking at things like a case control study where you would have a match between the control group versus the actual case. So the case would be the students who studied, and the control would be the student who didn't study, and then you can get a comparison that would be unbiased.
Okay, but so you're saying, but between the students who studied and didn't study, are they both using the program?
I guess I kind of assumed that studying would be with the program and not studying would obviously not be studying at all.
Right. But then wouldn't that still be confounding because you're taking the motivated students and the unmotivated students in two different groups? Or are you forcing students to study and forcing other students not to study?
I was thinking of it as in forcing them to study and forcing others not to study, but I didn't explicitly say that either. So
okay. Yeah, you're closer on it. I see a lot of raised hands. Who else wants to chime in?
I would say the confounding variable would be the teacher assign some students to the new computer software for hours time during the school day, while the others are doing it during normal time.
Okay, so they would assign them to it at different times of the day.
Yes.
Okay, but then
or assign some to it during the school day and some never to use it.
There you go. That's exactly what we would do. You gotta get back to this, take yourself out of the real world and think about in an experiment, you always have the control group and the experimental group, right? You have the people who get the placebo and the people who get the real pill. So in the case of the software, you got to randomly assign students to the software group and then randomly assign the other students to the not software group, right? And then that's the only way to really truly gauge the effectiveness of the software program. So in that random selection, you're going to get some high performing students and some low performance students that are going to use the software. And you're also going to get some high performing students and low performing students who don't use the software. So motivation gets taken out of it, right? And you're going to have some students that are strong in math skills use the software, and some who are weak, and same in the other group. So by randomly assigning the two groups, you get rid of all of the other things that could possibly influence a student scoring high or not scoring high on the SATs. Does that make sense to everybody?
It does make sense, but my question is, how can, so I guess I struggled because it seemed to me that you couldn't make a broad statement about an SAT score based only on math.
Well, that's true. Yes, I guess it should have been higher scores on the math portion of the SAT.
So I said that one of the confounding factors could be the other scores students
Yes.
who are,
You're absolutely right. Yeah,
excelling
good
in other
English.
areas.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I would say, just to simplify things, let's just pretend that they're talking about just the math portion of the SAT.
Okay. All right. I just thought maybe I read into it incorrectly.
No, I think they should have made that more explicit in the question, but I think because they're talking about a math teacher, and a new program that will improve math scores, it's pretty logical for us to assume when they're talking about higher scores on the SAT, they mean the math portion of the SAT. Because you're absolutely right. This would have absolutely zero bearing on the English portion of it, or the the writing portion. Although I think did they do away with that again? I know they introduced it, then they took it away, and I don't know if they brought it back. But anyhow, I know it wouldn't help with the English portion. All right. What else? Good discussions, guys.
I had a quick question. I kind of hopped on a little late, so I was kind of hearing pieces of the conversation, but are you looking for pictures and drawings or?
No.
Okay.
No.
Because I didn't do any.
No, that's fine. No. I think some people, are visual learners, so they'll draw pictures of things to try and figure out what they're doing. One person who had already gave me their homework to look it over had a big old table full of letters and stuff when they were, working out what was going on with the glazes and the thicknesses. And that's fine. The people are just, trying to orient themselves visually is totally fine, but I'm not looking for that as an answer, no. Danielle?
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to mute my mic.
No, you're fine. Daisha?
I have another question. My partner and I were working together a little bit ago, and our question is with 13B with the EPA.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up because that's a good one.
Well, you've already seen my answer and how I responded, and as always, I overthink and overexplain everything. I was like, he's either going to hate me or love me with this. But I guess our question is, what is the goal of this? Is the goal to locate the containers for the EPA, or is the goal to actually do enough tests to get the 100 containers tested, I guess?
Well, the goal is that they just want to inspect a sample of 100 containers, right? From the 4,000. They need to somehow gather a sample of 100 containers out of the total 4,000, so that when they test them, it gives them a rough idea of what's happening with all of the containers. And since they don't know the exact location of the containers, the only way to do this would be with simple random sampling. You just have to basically randomly pick, a landfill, randomly pick a location, and start digging until you find a container. And repeat that process over and over again until you have found 100 containers. And a lot of people always come back with, well, I would do stratified sampling or cluster sampling. Well, yeah, that's a good thought, but that would only work if you knew where the containers were. And since you don't know where the containers were, how the hell are you going to stratify them? If you don't know where the containers are, how the hell do you put them in clusters, right? So that's why those two techniques really don't work. Now, technically, I guess you could argue, well, I know where the landfills are, dummy, so I could just cluster the landfills, right? Or I could just stratify the landfills. Well, then my response would be, yeah, but how do you know there's any containers in those landfills? So there's too many unknowns to do anything other than just throwing a dart at a dartboard until you find 100 of those containers.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. What else? Anybody else? I think those are all the tricky ones we've already touched on. 16 can be, well, we already talked about how the experimental unit and the measurement unit can both be thought of as the patients. The book, if you looked at the book's solution, they would say that the experimental unit is the wards and the measurement unit is the patients. And really either of those answers is totally fine. I think the rest of it is pretty straightforward. But if somebody wants to ask about that, that's fine.
Dr. McBride?
Yes.
This is Julie. Could we go over A, B, and C for 216?
Yeah, of course.
I kept going back and forth.
So the factors are just the type of drug. And so then that means that the levels are just the different types of drugs that are being administered. So drug 1, drug 2, and placebo, or D1, D2, and placebo. And then the blocks become the hospitals.
Mm. Okay.
Okay.
That makes sense.
I'm confused. So let me go back. And I guess my understanding is, so the factors were D1 and D2, correct?
Well, no, the factors are just type of drug. So the factors is just generally what are we studying? We're studying the type of drugs. Then the factor levels is, okay, specifically what are we studying? We're studying D1, D2, and the placebo.
Okay, so I have my factor levels incorrect. Okay.
So the factors just talks about as a group of things what's being studied. Those are your factors. And then the factor levels say, okay, in that group of things, how many options are there? Oh, well, there's D1, D2, and placebo.
That explanation helped. Thank you.
Absolutely, that's what I'm here for. All right, I know we went over 22. We talked about 23.
I was just going to say, all right, so we've covered A, B, C, D, and E. Now, how about F and G and H?
Okay, well, what do you think F is, right? Replications basically talks about, how we're doing this. How are we, so we've blocked things by hospitals. So each hospital is its own block. And then within that block, we have an experimental unit of the wards. And then within those wards, we have the measurement units that are the patients. And now what's happening, right? What are our replications? Well, specifically, what are we doing within those wards? And, so specifically, what are we doing with our drugs in relationships to the wards and the hospitals?
I'm not going on a guess here. This is Jackie, but are we giving part of them the placebo and part of them the experimental drug?
Yeah, and specifically, if we look at it, what it says right here, within each hospital, 2 wards are randomly assigned to D1, 2 to D2, and 2 to the placebo. So the replications just means that we're doing 2 wards per each drug in each of the 10 hospitals. So within each of the 10 hospitals, we're going to randomly choose 2 wards and give them drug 1, randomly choose 2 wards to get D2, and randomly choose 2 wards to get the placebo. And because that is what's happening within each block, right? That's being replicated 10 times across the 10 hospitals. That's our replication. That's what we're doing in each block. So that's why that's what is considered the replication. So I always try and bring it back to the, the titles. That's why it's called a replication, because it's what are we doing over and over again? What are we replicating from one block to the next? And so with that in mind, what are some covariates?
Age, BMI, blood pressure, and measure of degree of illness?
A+, Cecily. Perfect.
Thank you.
Well done. Okay, now for the last one. What are the treatments? And I open that up to everybody. What do you think the treatments are?
It's a combination of which drug per ward.
Yeah, and specifically, the treatments are just the same as the factor levels. The treatments are just whether they got D1, D2, and placebo. Exactly. Yep. You got it.
But I do have a question. This is Cecily again, and I apologize everybody for butting in.
Please don't apologize. That's what it's for.
I had written that the treatment was D1, but the control treatments were D2 and the placebo.
Okay.
Is that true, or am I overthinking it, or?
I think you're overthinking it. I mean, we just want to talk about the treatments in general, and we'll just say that all three of them are treatments. I'm not so sure that D2 and the placebo would be considered the control. I would think more the placebo would be the control. And what's really happening is we already know that D2 is an effective drug. What we're testing is whether or not D1 is a more effective drug. So I can see why you would think of D2 as being the control, because we're going to compare D1 to it. But the true control would be the placebo group, because we have to have a baseline measurement that we see if there's any effect from either drug, right? So the placebo group is going to be that baseline control measurement. Then we can see what kind of effect D2 is getting above and beyond what we're getting out of the placebos. And then we can also compare whether or not drug 1 is getting even more of an effect than drug 2.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
Yeah, of course. All right, so we've done those. We've gone over everything except for the really easy ones where they talk about, what's the population and sampling and all that kind of stuff. So I think everybody should be able to crush this assignment. Kofi?
I think we haven't gone over everything. There's one that talks about randomized design and randomized block design or Latin squares.
Yeah, that's the one about the glaze and the thickness.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, where the heck is that? Right here. 22. Yeah, we talked about that one, and that we know it's a randomized complete block design where it's blocked by day, and then it's a two-factor structure because we're only looking at the two factors being the type of glaze that's used and then the thickness of the glaze. Because it says right up here, right, there are 4 different glazes at 2 different thicknesses. So those are the only 2 factors, right? The only 2 things that can be changed from one group to the next. That's what factors are, right? It's almost like, dials on a machine. I can change this dial to change the output, and I can change this dial over here to also change the output. I've got 2 different dials, one for glaze and one for thickness. So that means I have 2 factors, 2 dials. And then the factor levels would be this dial has 4 choices for the different glazes, and this factor over here has 2 levels because I only have 2 choices for thickness. Anything else? All right. Has anybody moved on to next week's stuff and have any questions on that? Jacqueline?
That's what I was just going to ask. I was going to ask how much I guess next Wednesday, like in depth, do you go into that week's homework as far as the code and that? So I've started.
Don't forget, we have a meeting on Monday as well.
Oh yeah, Monday too. Monday and Wednesday. Okay.
I am
need to
happy
go
to
back in and
show. I'm happy to show complete in-depth code
if we
whenever
ask.
needed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I've gotten through some of them and I'm getting stuck on some of them, and it's partly when I'm trying to add in your code from that sheet.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, what am I doing? And then not knowing the system too, or still trying to learn it, I think is what I'm struggling. So
Yeah, playing with the code is not always the easiest thing.
okay.
What I'll show everybody this right now, because if you want to start playing with code next week, it'd be nice to you to be able to maybe play around with this on the weekend or whatever before even Monday's class. But if you want to try some of the coding options, right? So in our Google Drive, I've got the SAS stuff, right? And we've got this SAS how-to summary document. And in here, it's got samples of code that we can use to do various things. So for instance, let's just say that we wanted to, well, these are just finding modes. This is really good code because SAS doesn't report multiple modes, but if you use this code, it will, which is great because one of the questions next week, the groups do have multiple modes. And if you just go in and do the standard summary statistics in SAS, it's just going to report the smallest mode and it's not going to report the second one. But if you use this code, it'll actually report all of the modes, which is pretty damn cool. But we could also, if we wanted to play around with the histogram, we could use this code. But in either case, let's say we wanted to mess around with the modes, right? We wanted to try and do this. So I'm just going to do Control C.
And then in there for the univariate data, you put like if I'm using work import 1, I change that there. And
Exactly.
then
Yes.
class wouldn't necessarily be group, or var wouldn't necessarily be rate for that question, right? It would be whatever
Exactly. You've got to
variable
change it to
I've
whatever the
got in
variable
that
is.
table.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
because that threw me off at first, but
Yeah,
I got
and
there.
that's the whole idea with these codes is, sure, this is one specific use of it, but you need to know what you have to augment. So you have to change the variable name if your variable has a different name, and obviously change the name of the variable that you're going to use for the class. And then you have to make sure that you're telling it where your data is, because that could change depending on how you saved it. And really, those are the three things that need, and that's really what happens with any of this code. You always have to change data equals depending on where your data is, and you always have to change the variable name if your variable is named something else. And then that code becomes something that you could use over and over again, even later on in another class, as long as you understand the basic structure of the code is you've got this proc statement, which is for procedure. And it tells you what kind of procedure it's going to run. It's going to run the univariate procedure. Okay, what's it going to run it on? Well, it's going to run it on some data. Where's the data located? It's located in this spot. So I have to change that if my data is located somewhere else. And then what variables am I going to run this procedure on? It lists a bunch of variables. And again, you change that if you have to. And then it's got to run. And that's pretty much the structure of every program in SAS. It starts with the procedure. You got to tell it where the data is. You tell it what variables to mess around with, and then you tell it to run. And it, and then above and beyond that, they're just extra things. There are extra little phrases you can put in there to make it do other things, but that basic structure of the program is always the same. So if you want to run any kind of program, all you have to do, let me get rid of this, is what I do is I just open up anything. And then I go over here to where the code is and I just hit edit. And it just gives me a copy of what that code was, which is usually just a bunch of crap that means nothing. It's just a bunch of words. But it now calls it program 1, and now this is editable, and it's editable, able to be edited. And you can do whatever you want with it. The first thing I do is just get rid of everything and put in my code, right? And then of course I've got to load my data, and because if I ran this right now, nothing's going to happen because I don't have any code, right? The work.import, I don't have any, sorry, I don't have any code. I don't have any data. There's no data there. So it's like, what the hell? How do I do this? But that's how you start, is just open anything in the tasks menu. Just double click on any of them to, bring a program over here. Click on the edit button and it creates, if I do it again, it's going to create a new one called program 2. And then I can do the whole thing all over again, right? I can delete this stuff. And if I wanted to, I could start typing in code manually. So that's how you play with this stuff as far as the code is concerned. And then just make sure that you load your data.
Is there like a place, again, I have to go back and rewatch all these videos on how to use it, but I'm sure it's in there. But is there a place on like different codes that could be used? Like, for example, like I was going to use SAS for the one assignment to do the mean, the mode, and that under, I think it was under statistical summary.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's exactly what you would do. Yeah.
I didn't like the way the output looked. It had, I don't know, 9 or 8 decimal places. So I gave up and I just went into Excel and did it.
Yes,
It was
you
much easier.
can change.
But I didn't know,
places.
was there a way to say like process equals something and make only 2 decimals? Like,
Yes.
is there somewhere out there to find basic code
yes.
like that?
Yes, there is. Let's
Because all of the options in the box that came up in the middle had nothing where you can change it. It looked like I had to just put in a code. But
I thought I had it linked in the classroom. Let me.
Okay, it could be. Like I said, I just kind of started getting in there.
I mean, I'll show you
So I
where
haven't
it
really
is.
looked at
This
everything.
SAS Help Center, documentation.sas.com. This is a great place to search for things like that. So you could go in and you could just search decimal places. And while that's loading, I'll go see. I thought I had that link in the classroom. I think it's under the SAS help announcement. SAS help. Darn it. No, it's not there. I should have put it there. I apologize. But I thought it was in the classroom somewhere. I could have sworn.
Maybe it's one of the links in the modules. Like I said,
Yeah, I thought it was in one of the modules already where I know it used to be in the old classroom. Maybe it's not in this new Canvas environment, but SAS on demand. I should probably just add it to that announcement and keep it for, and I'll go ahead and add that in later tonight. But you can just Google search for it. But so here you go, formatting values in table columns, general informat syntax. I'm sure one of these will show you how to do it, and I know it can be done. I remember how to do it. I don't remember how to do it. I remember doing it before, changing that. And I can't remember what the specifics are, but there is a way. Oh, this looks like it just formats the table itself and not the decimals. But you can also just go to Google and say, like SAS decimal places for output. There you go, format 3 decimal places, which this will show me exactly how to do it. Following code, I'm trying to, and then what you expect display, proc export. And then it looks like this probably would help us. Specifies the width of the output field, so that might do it right there. Specifies, oh, here you go. Specifies the number of digits to the right of the decimal place in a numeric value. That's perfect. So that's exactly what you want is the D argument. And then they usually have examples of the code. But I think if you just, let's go back to the code. If you just put, I think probably up here, D, it doesn't seem to want to take it there. Because this is usually where you put these types of things, procedure options. But that doesn't seem to want it there. So how about, it still doesn't look like it wants it there either. So I'd have to look at this a little bit more in depth to see where it goes. Where does this syntax go? Where do you put the D in your formulas, in your code? Darn it, is what I'm looking for. But
Okay,
you see,
well that helps
it's
because I
out there.
struggled with Google out there too, and I couldn't find. I've done some programming and coding in like Toad or an SQL, so I'm a little familiar.
I know it's
but
doable.
I'm like,
I just can't
usually you could just
remember.
Google stuff and someone will have the code out there where you can find it.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I
Okay.
usually tell my students is just do that kind of
Just-
Googling.
Okay.
And then if one of you figures it out, then paste your code to the discussion board, and then I'll add it to the set. Like this code for modes, this came from a student a couple terms ago. She was just a spitfire with code, man. She loved the idea of code, and you know, she wanted to play around with stuff, and she would just find these things. She's like, oh, hey, I figured out how to get multiple modes. I'm like, really? She's like, yeah. And she gave me the code, and so I put it here. And then she's like, oh, I figured out a way to, you know, to make the graphs, the histograms look better. So, you know, this is her code to make the histograms look better. So a lot of times I'll get code from students that just, you know, decide that they want to spend the time and play around with it, which is awesome. And then I'll just add it to this document. So if you find out how to do that, then please let me know, and I'll add it to this code, you know, because under summary statistics would be a perfect place to put it. Hey, if you want to, you know, change the decimal places to only 3 decimals, because I'm with you. Sometimes it looks terrible when it gives you like 9 decimals. You're like, oh,
yeah,
crap,
it was like 9 or 10,
yeah.
and I'm like, I don't think that's how it should look. And I'm like, oh,
yeah,
no.
I thought
I'll
there
just
was,
go over to Excel.
I don't think there's, let me see if just before we go, I thought I don't think there's an option for it. Details, degrees of freedom, no, output, no, yeah. So it doesn't look like they have the option where you can just click on it, unfortunately. But I know there is a way to change it with the code. So if you find it, let me know.
Okay, I'm gonna keep looking.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I just wanted to share for those of us who aren't as advanced that the Learning Commons does have a class, Intro to SAS, this Saturday at 9.
Thank you. Yes, I forgot to mention that. And that is a phenomenal class, guys. I cannot recommend it enough. So if you can make it, please attend it. And I think they record it, and you can watch the recording afterwards as well. But it's definitely better to attend if you can. It's phenomenal. Every student who goes does nothing but raves about it. So absolutely try and get into that class. And Cecily, they can just go to the Learning Commons to register for it, right?
Right. It came in my email earlier in the week.
Yeah, that's what I thought. They
and
sent an email out to everybody.
Yeah, and I went ahead and signed up, but you can check the option to do the live class or get the recording, and you can check, well, not or, and get the recording. I had to do that with something else, I think during English 800, And
Oh,
it worked
Prabha.
because I missed the very beginning of the class, which I might miss on Saturday. And so I figured that's, oh, somebody shared a link.
Yes, thank you, Prabha. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. That is very kind of you and very helpful. So there's the link, everybody. Please copy it and paste it somewhere, you know, and be able to use it later. But definitely, even if you can't attend it, it's worth your time to go here and choose the recording, because I think they'll let you get the recording without attending. And I'm sure they will. And even if you say I'm going to attend and want the recording and then don't attend because you can't, you're still going to get the recording, which is going to be very helpful. But try and attend it if you can. That's I'm so glad you mentioned that. I totally forgot to. That's fantastic. Thank you. Anything else before we go?
Dr. McBride,
Yes, Seth.
just one last question. I know you said it during our meeting on Monday, but I didn't get to write it down. Going forward for you reviewing homework, do you want things by Wednesday night or Thursday night?
I'd like them no later than Thursday midnight Pacific time. I'll even let that go to maybe like 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning on Friday, because basically by the time I get up Friday morning, if it's not in my inbox, I ain't looking at it.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Anything else?
Yes, Dr. McBride, I was looking for the link to the Learning Commons. I only see your screen.
Oh, it's in the chat box. Can you not see it in the chat box?
Okay, I'll look for it.
I'll put it over here on the screen so everybody can see it. Because if you open up the chat box, then it's an active hyperlink. You can just click on it straight from there and go straight to where you want to go.
Okay.
Yes, thank you again, Prabha, for putting that up there. That's very helpful. Anybody else? Jacqueline, your hand's still up? You got a question, or is that just your hand is still up?
Must have still just been up. There it goes.
No problem. Okay, well, excellent session, everybody. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for contributing. I look forward to seeing many of you on Monday as well. As soon as this video renders, I will copy and paste the link to the video, remember, on our recordings page here, because since we have 4 different sections, I can't just do it for one section, by going Zoom to that section. So this is where you'll want to go to access the recordings. The one for Monday is there, and then this one will be up there pretty soon. So you're very welcome. I'm so glad that this worked for everybody, and I'll see you Monday.